So I hear to become a squire, you need to know a squire, and then the squire has to refer you or like
You have to be
recommend
nominated.
you. Oh, nominated.
It's a process.
You know, I notice he's never, recommended me. I guess I better like that.
Maybe you have been recommended and hadn't been approved.
Oh, okay. You never know.
This is a super complex whiskey.
100%.
Really, really good whiskey.
Whiskey fam, sit down and grab a dram. Sit down and listen to the soothing sounds of your boy Whiskey One Talk Whiskey. And Daniel Warren, of course, from the Albuquerque Whiskey Society. Thanks for coming by.
Thanks for having me again, Israel.
You got it. So today's theme is reviewing the Jack Daniel's 10 and 12 from a fanboy's perspective and from, I would say, an average Joe's perspective. Thank you guys for joining and watching the video. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing. And if you're a return sipper, thanks again and much love for showing support throughout the years. Now, if you want to contribute even more and be a bigger supporter, consider being a Patreon supporter. We are definitely venturing off into different things, and becoming a Patreon helps us to grow the channel that much more. So without further ado, let's just get into it. Starting with the 10. You guys ready?
Let's hear the pop.
Okay, let's get this going. All right, so the 10 and the 12 have been released this year. I think it was about a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, that the 10 was released, but not the 12. So this is now a healthy comparison of age statement Jack Daniels over the years. So we're going to pour not only the 10, but the 12 and see which one we like the most.
Thank you, sir.
You got it.
Thank you.
All right, so obviously the bottle is opened for the 10. The 10 is mine. The 12 is Daniel's. So talk to me about why you became like a fanboy or a big supporter of Jack Daniel's. Like, what was it about Jack Daniel's?
Well, even though I live in New Mexico now, I grew up in Tennessee. And as a kid, my mom and dad, they don't drink, but they have a really good friend who's a big Jack Daniel's fan. So even as a little boy, I remember going to the distillery, which was about an hour from our house. We'd go to that distillery, we would tour the distillery, and we just continued to go throughout my childhood. And once I moved away, I went back, took my wife now back to the distillery. She fell in love with Jack Daniel's just because of the campus and the things that they do and the attention they pay to detail, even just pushing out like Old Number 7. And so I've been able to see that distillery grow over time. You walk in, you're like, you don't recognize it today as what it was, 40, 30 years ago. So it's just been, Jack Daniel's is near and dear to my heart. I'm a Tennessee Squire, which I get to go to the Squire House when I'm there in Lynchburg. The square is beautiful. That little area there, the downtown area of Lynchburg is gorgeous, and it's just a great little small town feel.
So I hear to become a squire, you need to know a squire, and then the squire has to refer you or like
You have to be
recommend
nominated.
you. Oh, nominated.
It has to be a letter written. It's a process.
It's a process.
It is a process.
I notice he's never, recommended me.
We will see what happens in the near future.
I guess I better like that.
Maybe you have been recommended and hadn't been approved.
Oh, okay. You never know. I had a coworker that became a squire, and he told me about the process. I was like, wow, okay. He didn't go into detail though. He just said, hey, I became a squire because I knew somebody who was a squire.
Yeah. And they send you little gifts and letters, and those letters are funny. And you own a 1 inch by 1 inch plot of land, and they send you the deed to that land. Okay. And everything. So I own a 1 inch by 1 inch plot of land, and they'll send you funny little letters from the distillery, like, oh, we ran the cows off, and we made sure the fence was up, and so that they wouldn't get back on your land, and all this crazy stuff. So it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun.
That does sound like fun.
Yeah.
Well, let's jump into this. On the nose, it's kind of spicy.
Yeah.
I get a lot of baking spices up front.
A lot of baking spice, caramel, little burnt sugars.
Man, a good amount of black tea, and it feels thick.
Yeah.
It feels loaded, right, with with a little bit of flavor from all angles, I suppose. It doesn't feel low proof. Mm-hmm. If anything, it's a little higher proof than
It's a little higher than the single barrel. Single barrel usually comes in at 94, so this is 97.
Kind of bold on the nose, honestly.
It's bold. I think
and on the flavor.
Yeah, and I think those baking spices really still come through on the flavor. The finish is spicier than I remembered.
Yep.
Maybe a little bit of tobacco in there, like aging tobacco. When this sits a little bit longer, that baked banana bread aroma does come in.
Right when you said it,
Yeah.
I started getting that.
And that's why we talked before, and we decided to go ahead, when we poured the 10, we decided to go ahead and pour the 12, so the 12 could sit here for a couple minutes before we actually started drinking it. So it does, if I remember, because I haven't drank this, and, well, I've gone through a bottle, and I still have one at home. But I am a Jack Daniels collector, so
Yeah,
I do collect Jack Daniels. So when the Jack Daniels releases come out, you can ask my wife. It's like I have to have two, one to drink and one to put on the shelf. And that's the only thing that I'm going to put on a shelf and probably not drink is my Jack Daniels stuff.
Well, there's definitely brands that I have that same affinity for. Like, I know that it's going to be good. I better grab two because I probably will go through the first one fairly quickly, or I'll share it with a lot of folks, and would like to have that backup because you never know if you're going to find it again. Interestingly, as you were talking through, like, oh, you just got to let it rest, I'm like, oh my God, there it is.
It's there.
Yeah, it started to show up. You know, I was getting some red fruits, but now the banana becomes a little bit more up front than, you know, the dark fruits, the darker side. Like if anything, I was getting somewhat of a cherry, like a black cherry note there.
I think that brown sugar is coming through much more now, too.
Well, I'm going to take another sip, so cheers.
Yeah, cheers, my friend.
You got it.
The spiciness. So, for me, you know, I love Jack Daniel's Single Barrel. That's my jam, and that's my daily. I don't drink daily, but if somebody said, "What's your daily drinker?" I'd say Jack Daniel's Single Barrel, or Desert Island whiskey. Like, what would you have if you could only have one whiskey for the rest of your life? That was what it would be. But I think the spice on this is so much different than Jack Daniel's Single Barrel, and the finish on it is really, really appealing to me. I like it a lot. I think maybe there's still a few points of proof.
Yeah. And the single barrel's about, what, 45?
It's 94.
94
proof.
94 proof. Okay, so just
slightly
slightly lower than that. I wonder why they went with 48.5. I don't know if it was just that's where it needed to be. But it's still pretty bold and spicy, even just under
really
50% ABV. You know what? When it comes to like American bourbon, if you start to get past that 8-year mark, things start to get a little bit more oaky, like more leathery, albeit a little sharp, like a sharp oak. But I wasn't getting any sharp oak on that.
Yeah.
So now we're getting into that 12. Now, is it bottled at 48.5 or
This is 107, isn't it? 107, 108?
Yep, 107.
107.
53.5% ABV, but 107 proof.
But it doesn't, on the nose, that proof really doesn't come through.
No, it doesn't.
Not more than this one. But that nose is very interesting.
It feels very similar to the 10. Like, I'm going to do something now. I'm going to take the 10 and the 12 and just side by side them because they're that close. The 12 has a little bit more molasses.
Yeah,
it's like
got
more
sweeter,
sweet
like a sweet oak in it. And I get a little more oak, and it is sweeter. There's a little sharpness in this 10 now on the nose.
Yeah.
That mellowed out in this 12.
I do get a little bit of leather though on this.
Oh,
a little bit more tea.
Yeah.
It feels a little earthy.
This one
earthier than the 10.
earthier, yes.
And you know what? I'm noticing that banana funk a little bit easier on the 12.
I'm totally happy. Let's do it.
Cheers.
Cinnamon, baking spice.
Oh boy, you know what? On the 10, yeah, it was spicier, but it was almost like they weren't distinctive flavors that I could pick out. As soon as you said cinnamon, I was like, cinnamon up front, clove.
That
Definitely.
molasses is in there.
Yes, it's a lot more. There's a lot more happening here.
Yeah.
This is extra. This is good, but this is extra. So
there's some complexities You can sit down with this much of this whiskey and just pick it apart for an hour or so.
I totally
It's
agree.
so complex.
I'm gonna take another sip because it's good. It's good. More cherry too.
Mm-hmm.
It's more fruitier, more a little bit roundish. There's not as much tannins as I felt like the 10 had. The 10 felt like it was a little oaky on the tail. The 12, the oaks are kind of subdued and more fruity and sweet.
And I don't get the spice on the finish near what I had on this 10. Mm-mm. It's the spice is coming from the alcohol, from the proof point, not from the whiskey itself.
I would agree. Absolutely.
It's a phenomenal whiskey, and it's just
trying to see if there is a bit of a color difference. So this is like a burnt copper orange hue, and this is more amber, dark crimson on the color. So there is a color difference. The 2 years definitely had an impact. Just initially, I feel like the 12 has a little bit more than the 10, but I'm going to cleanse the palate and get back to that 10 real quick.
I cleanse between, and I think that does make a difference. Mm-hmm. But I have found this 12, and I've recently purchased this, so I haven't drank much, and I knew Israel and I were going to do this video, so I tried to keep it as full as possible. You know how hard that was. Because I really wanted to drink some more of this. But I do think the 12 is super complex, a delicious whiskey for the price point you're going to have to pay for it. I mean, it should be, $80 to $90. They're harder to come by. It's somewhat of a limited release. But as we know, Jack Daniel's did the 10 2 years in a row. So they did it last year and this year. So hopefully these are going to become staples in the lineup at Jack. Both of these, hopefully. What's your overall thoughts on the 12?
I like it so much more than the 10. So if you hear people talk about the 12 is better than the 10, I would agree. It's in my opinion way better. I feel like it's fuller. The 10 feels complete, but the 12 feels fuller, like fuller bodied. The proof point is higher. The notes and the flavors just kind of jump out at you a little bit more. And of course, it's balanced. I feel like with the 10, there's a bit of alcohol that hits you, and it's a sort of misplaced for me. And that's just my opinion, that being under 50%, I really shouldn't get a ton of alcohol like I would expect in the 50s and the 60% ABVs or the 120 proofs. But the 12 being that much higher, it feels more warming than it feels like an ethanol punch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And I did, while you were chatting, I went back and tried the 10 again, and there is a distinct difference between the two. Mm-hmm. Very obvious difference in the two. And it's amazing to me how just 2 additional years can make that much of a change in the whiskey.
Give me your perspective as like a fan of Jack Daniel's. Like so this is your fanboy interpretation of the 10 and the 12.
So I think I love everything Jack Daniel's does, right? I've purchased it all. I have it all. And fanboy, from that perspective, I'm going to buy everything that they release.
But did it meet expectations? Were you in your mind thinking that 10? Oh my God, that 12. Geez.
When the 10 first came out, I knew the 12 was coming. When the 10 first came out, it was phenomenal. I think it was one of the better whiskeys that they had ever released. I think by them releasing 10 and 12 and putting age statements on their whiskey, it really shows what they can do.
So would you buy them again?
100%. All day.
All day.
Yeah.
So you can only walk away with one though. Like say you're standing in line, you know what I mean? Those allocated days, right? You're standing in line and they say, hey, limited to one,
12.
but you can only pick one.
12.
All day, right?
All day.
Would you pay $200 for it?
Probably.
Okay.
I think it's that. I think I've paid $200 for a whiskey that's not worth $200. Mm-hmm. I've paid $300 for a whiskey that's not worth $300. That's not worth $100.
I think you paid $500 or $400 for one.
I paid for one that's not quite worth that, right? But I think this one is well worth its money. I paid $100 for it. If I find another one to drink that's $200 or less, I would definitely throw down on it. I think it's that good. You'll find this probably in a lot of people's whiskey of the year in 2023.
If my memory serves me right, I paid $70. I paid retail, a fair retail price on the 10. And I thought for $70, this is well worth it. It's a solid whiskey. If I buy this for the 12 year for $80, well worth the price. I would spend about as much as $100, maybe $110, $120 would probably be my ceiling on that. But at the end of the day, you really are chasing after the name, you're chasing after the hunt, and you're really chasing after the stuff that's in it, the juice. So I think for whiskey connoisseur, that's who this is going to speak to the most.
I think they would also, when this one first came out, I thought it was phenomenal, loved it. I thought, dude, this is a cigar whiskey. I think they both would be really good cigar whiskeys. They're heavy. They're big enough to stand up with that cigar. I think they would both be really good cigar whiskeys.
And I think the spice from the 10 and the 12 would really complement a cigar too.
Totally.
So that's a really good point. I'm glad you pointed that out. All right, folks. Thanks, Daniel, for stopping by
Thank you, buddy.
Sharing the 12 and talking whiskey with me and getting your perspective, because I know you're a big supporter. And here at Whiskey One, it's about the one you enjoy. Cheers.